Every day, 200 to 300 people are choosing to leave Canada behind, severing their ties with the country to embark on new adventures abroad, whether for work, education, or the vision of a fresh start with greater opportunities elsewhere. But this reality often flies under the radar, as Canada is far more renowned for its ambitious immigration policies, welcoming over 1,300 new permanent residents daily in 2024, not to mention the influx of temporary residents on work and study permits, boosting these numbers even more. As a result, since 2019, Canada's population has surged by over 1.9 million new permanent residents, a deliberate effort to support a nation facing a declining birth rate while aiming for continued growth and hopefully economic prosperity. However, this massive influx of new residents and temporary workers has created significant challenges for Canada and its citizens, while the government has attempted to deflect blame onto companies and universities, accusing them of exploiting the very policies it implemented. Housing and rent costs have soared to unprecedented levels, youth unemployment has reached record highs, and these issues are compounded by a declining GDP per capita and persistent inflation that's eroded away the savings of millions of Canadians, to the point where the average outstanding Canadian credit card balance has now reached a staggering $4,300, up 14% year over year, with Canadians now holding the highest level of household debt on the planet. All of this has now led more Canadians than ever before to consider leaving the country they once loved in search of a more fruitful and fulfilling life abroad. So let's discuss 7 reasons why thousands of Canadians are making this difficult decision. Let's do it. Alright, so number one, of course, the main reason why more Canadians than ever before are choosing to leave Canada is due to the high cost of living. And I know everyone's spoken about this online, it's big in the media, covered a lot on the news, so I'm sure you're already aware of this issue, especially if you are Canadian watching this right now. But can we seriously take a moment here to appreciate how incredibly expensive it has truly become to live in Canada, especially for those under the age of like 50 who didn't buy a house before 2010 and have been paying into a pension over the last 25 years. So the 5 largest areas of monthly spending for the average Canadian are in order: housing, transportation, food, health and personal care, and utilities and communication, all of which have just exploded in cost over the past 5 years. I mean, here are a couple of stats that shed some light on this. Average house across Canada, $650,000, up from $450,000 in 2015. Average 2-bedroom apartment rent in Toronto, $2,640 per month, up from $1,194 in 2015. That one's crazy. Average monthly cost for groceries between $600 and $1,100 today, up from $300 to $500 in 2015. So more than double. Meanwhile, though, the median income across the country in 2024 is around $55,000, up from only, wait for it, $53,000 in 2015. Just think about how unrealistic that sounds. And so all of this has led to charts that look like this one right here, which is a visual representation of Canadians struggling to tread financial waters. And unfortunately, the data suggests that we're headed for continued and even increased financial hardship over the foreseeable future in regards to housing, declining GDP per capita, declining productivity, increased taxes. Overall, it's just harder than ever for Canadians to sustain that current high cost of living that we're all experiencing. And here's the thing, like it or not, it is a fact that the foundation of a prosperous country that provides financial growth, job opportunity, and overall prosperity for its people starts with a good economy that's actually productive and is able to create something for itself, where its citizens actually feel like they're contributing to it and reaping the rewards of their efforts, rather than taxing the shit out of its people while telling them it's the best country in the world and then pathetically offering them a $250 check check paid for by their own tax dollars, which, as we just covered, is like a week's worth of groceries in this day and age. I mean, it's just downright insulting, and I think a lot of people are waking up to the realities of this less than ideal situation with very little light at the end of the tunnel for so many. So yeah, that pretty well summarizes the high cost of living here in Canada. If you're struggling with this issue, let me know down in the comments how you're coping with it, some things you're doing, strategies potentially, and while you're doing that, let's talk about high taxes, because this really just goes hand in hand with the high cost of living in Canada. So Canada has become well known for its extremely high taxes, and while it's not the country with the highest income tax brackets on the planet, well, it's definitely up there in terms of total taxes paid as a working living citizen. And this is when all taxes are taken into account and then deducted from your gross pay, which in theory shouldn't actually be a bad thing, right? Because the goal of a nation with high taxes is to allow for things like healthcare and childcare benefits, social programs, less poverty overall, and just a more equal redistribution of wealth to everyone. That is the ideal situation and scenario that calls for high taxes. But unfortunately, what's happening now in Canada is hardworking Canadians are feeling the pressures of inflated living costs, but feeling like the huge tax contributions that they're paying each year are being poorly allocated and in an unproductive or useful way to actually help better their lives in the first place. Taxes Canadians are subject to include the following and even more, which can absolutely account for over 2/3 of total after-tax income, depending on what type of income you earn and how much of it you earn. Income tax, property tax, school tax, land transfer tax, payroll taxes and deductions, up to 15% sales tax on every purchase you make, depending on the province you're in, luxury taxes on vehicles and boats. The list just goes on and on and on, and it seems like Canada just continues to add more taxes to their system, burdening its people even more. And most Canadians I've spoken with feel that despite paying these very high taxes, the quality and accessibility of public services like healthcare, infrastructure, and even affordable housing have not kept pace with their contributions in the slightest. In fact, they're just increasingly getting worse seemingly. And here's the thing, the main problem is that these challenges are particularly acute for middle income earners who make T4 employment income, right? I'm speaking here about people earning between say $50,000 to $150,000 per year working a job who shoulder a significant portion of the tax burden relative to their income, yet often do not qualify for many of these very social programs that they're paying into. And this imbalance leads many Canadians questioning whether or not their high tax contributions are effectively addressing issues like poverty and drug reduction, infrastructure improvements, or the quality of healthcare. So as a result, a growing number of Canadians are seeking opportunities abroad in countries with lower tax rates and at least perceived higher returns on public spending. And of course, nowhere is going to be perfect. Every country has its own unique set of challenges. We can't forget that. But in the respect of living your daily life on the day-to-day basis, the prospect of retaining more of your income while enjoying comparable or even better public services elsewhere makes leaving Canada an increasingly attractive option for many. And as a quick side note here, most people who are leaving Canada end up usually going to the United States for the list of reasons that we're speaking about in today's video. And of course, the United States has its own set of challenges that it needs to overcome. However, just from an economic standpoint for individuals living in the US versus Canada, despite taking into account, health insurance that usually you need to pay for on a month-to-month basis in order to cover your healthcare in the event something were to happen, well, generally speaking, as an American, you're keeping a lot more of your income and you're spending less of it on taxes. Let me give you an example. Let's say you were to live in Florida. Well, income tax at the state level is nil. You're basically just paying federal taxes. On top of that, you're purchasing a house, for example, that is going to be usually half the price of what you can get comparatively in Canada. And so you're keeping more of your earned income, you're spending less of it on your housing, which is generally the largest expense people have. Then every time you go to the store, sales tax is only 5%, so you're saving way more, probably 5 to 10% on every purchase you make, make relative to purchases in Canada. Your interest on your mortgage is tax deductible in your principal residence. You're also able to defer taxes on any real estate investments. Everything that has to do with taxation from an investment standpoint is generally in your favor. All of this to say, over the course of an entire lifetime and compounded over the years, we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, or even millions of dollars saved just living somewhere outside of Canada, like say Florida or another tax efficient state. So that's something that I think is becoming very appealing to a lot more Canadians who are choosing to leave. And a lot of the people who are choosing to leave are higher income earners and people who have a high skill set that are able to apply in a market that seemingly rewards them better. All right, so let's talk job market limitations a little bit more here. And I know this is particularly a problem in many developed countries right now, but in Canada, it's become increasingly worse, especially for high skilled workers who can often make much, much higher salaries and wages in the US, where the dollar is even worth a lot more as well. You keep more of your paycheck and the cost of living is just significantly lower. So you can't blame people for wanting that for themselves and their family. Now, despite a generally low national unemployment rate of 6.5% as of 2024, significant disparities do exist across age groups and regions of the country, where youth unemployment remains alarmingly high in Canada at 11.3%, with limited opportunities for entry-level positions to start making money and build into a career, while core working age adults, so 25 to 54 years old, maintain a much lower unemployment rate of only 4.6%. That being said, just speaking anecdotally here from my own experience and with peers around me, it is really difficult to find high-paying jobs right now in the private sector. And speaking from my own experience, being a business owner is even harder for, yes, of course, the challenges that just inherently come with being self-employed, but even more so from navigating around a country's rules, taxes, and regulations that seemingly don't want to encourage business in Canada, and a country that acknowledges the fact that business owners are the ones who ultimately provide jobs and economic growth to the country. So it's for this reason that most of the people I know of who have found any type of success here in Canada have tried to leave the country pretty much as quickly as possible, specifically to, yes, the United States, mind you, and that's despite Canada still trying to, sink their teeth into you to tax you one last time on your departure. It's really sad. And hey, where I live in Ottawa, being the capital of Canada and therefore a government town, the general mindset around work and productive output is just kicked to the curb, with over 270,000 people who work for the public service, which is up 40% in size since 2015. That just doesn't make any sense at all. To summarize, countries with stronger economies, lower taxes, or more robust job markets in specific industries at least are becoming more and more attractive to Canadian residents, especially younger professionals who feel like they can start their life elsewhere in a more productive manner. Let me know down in the comments if you're a Canadian who's had any issues with finding work of any kind, let alone high-paying work. Reason number 4 here, Canada's harsh winters are of course a major reason why many people choose to leave the country, mainly as, more of a complement though to everything else that we're covering today. So for most of the population, winters here last several months, with temperatures often plummeting below 20 degrees Celsius and with 5-foot snowbanks, particularly in provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, Quebec, and Manitoba. And realistically, yes, many people will tell you to just, suck it up, you're being a downer, you're negative, it's not that bad. But the reality is that these conditions make outdoor activities very difficult. They make your commute less enjoyable. They lead to higher heating bills, higher stress often, and impact many people's mental health, as long periods of cold and darkness are associated with seasonal affective disorder. And honestly here, I'd be lying if I told you I haven't experienced seasonal affective disorder. Every single year in November and most of December, when the days are super short, there's 6 hours of sunlight and mostly overcast, it's just hard to keep your spirits up and be productive towards your goals. At least it is for me. I know a lot of people can relate to this, and it's obviously for a reason that roughly 1 million Canadians travel south each winter to temporarily get away from the cold weather. But hey, that's if you're able to actually afford doing that. Everyone else is stuck up here in a freezer. So yes, while many Canadians do embrace winter sports and activities, most find the extended harsh weather extremely taxing, both physically and mentally. Go figure for Canada, especially though when compared to milder climates elsewhere. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Everyone has different preferences, you know? And I will say this though, life absolutely slows down in winter. And from a social standpoint, it's just way harder to see people because there are practically no outdoor events. People are more tired, they stay home and hibernate. It's just really not as enjoyable. Moving into a big one here, we have healthcare, right? Canada has long prided itself on offering universal healthcare to its people. And yeah, for the most part, it has been one of the greatest benefits of being Canadian over the past several decades. But the problem now is that the healthcare system has become increasingly burdened by a growing population, an aging population, and by a growing lack of healthcare professionals to serve the demand. So this has now led to insanely long wait times at the emergency room, which many are forced to go to, unfortunately, because they don't have a family doctor, extremely long wait times for any type of specialist appointment, that's if you can even get one, and even longer wait times for anything that's deemed non-urgent or, God forbid, preventative, if you can even convince your doctor to help you out on those matters. As a result, the healthcare that's truly covered by taxes has turned into a defensive-only strategy, and any type of preventative healthcare that goes above, say, breaking your arm, having a heart attack, or getting antidepressants prescribed is practically non-existent here. And I'll give you a couple of direct examples about this. Number one, my fiance now does not have a family doctor after hers suddenly left the country to go back and practice overseas. They didn't reassign her patients to other doctors in the clinic, and upon requesting for reassignment, they told her that they were only accepting new patients that either fell under being a visible minority, a worker, or being part of the LGBTQ community. Probably the most Canadian answer ever and downright just unacceptable in my opinion. Number two, my doctor is on the verge of retirement and I also won't have any form of reassignment. And the clinics I've applied to have multi-year long wait lists. This is an issue that millions of Canadians are now facing, and even still, if I'm being honest here, most doctors that I've dealt with at the public level seemingly just run you through a conveyor belt and prescribe you a pill rather than actually uncover what may be actually the root cause to your problem. And it's now gotten to the point where I know multiple people who have resorted to now paying out of their own pocket for private healthcare, which is kind of a gray zone. You're not actually supposed to even do this, but this is despite still paying their high taxes for the fallacy of this free healthcare in Canada. So it ends up costing a couple $1,000s extra each year, but you do have access to an assigned doctor and can actually get things done in a matter of days or weeks instead of months or years through the public system. Kind of sounds like just getting a healthcare plan down in the US, except you're also paying through the roof in taxes for a service that you aren't even using. So yeah, honestly, I could make an entire 25-minute video about healthcare in Canada alone, but overall, it is a broken system and people are just fed up with the waits and lack of service. I know a woman who has leukemia and she's told me, above the disease being a nightmare, of course, it's been absolutely awful having to deal with it through the public healthcare system. Honestly, what a nightmare. Point number 6 here is definitely less concrete and rooted in trackable data, but rather it's more based on general perceptions that I and many Canadians I've spoken with have increasingly felt over the past couple of years. And that would be a lack of just overall pride for the country and sense of cultural direction. Let me expand a little bit more on what I mean here. So in the past, Canada has often been viewed as a beacon of multiculturalism and progressive values, which is truly one of the reasons it's long been a great place to set down roots and raise a family. However, recent years have seen increasing challenges to this perception, as I know a lot of Canadians are feeling like what once made us great in the past has now been completely blown out of proportion and low-key taken advantage of in a way that's now creating a perceived drift from a cohesive cultural identity, leaving many feeling relatively disconnected from the country's general direction at this point, and therefore prompting them to seek opportunities elsewhere that align more closely with their values and aspirations. Additionally, it's just a fact here that issues like growing economic inequality, rising housing costs, and political polarization have eroded a unified sense of national pride here in Canada, which is just really unfortunate to see unfolding before us. And for many, these problems highlight a gap between the ideals Canada stands for and the lived experiences as a resident. But hey, let me know down in the comments if you think I'm totally off the mark here, or if there's some truth to what I'm bringing up. And finally, a video speaking about why Canadians are leaving the country in droves in 2024 can't be complete without speaking about the astronomical cost of rent and housing, which is directly caused by the lack of supply and availability. Now, we spoke about average housing and rent costs in the beginning of the video when covering the cost of living, but housing falls into its own category altogether, in my opinion, as it's truly the foundation of the Canadian dream, or at least it once was, where people aspire to build equity and raise a family. But unfortunately, housing is becoming increasingly out of reach for anyone who hasn't been in the market since pre-pandemic, having had the opportunity to build a ton of equity along the way. Now, I've made a bunch of videos on my channel speaking about the Canadian housing crisis, so check those out if you're interested. But what you really need to know here for the context of this video is that at least until 2030, there are no expectations whatsoever of Canada building enough homes and units to make it affordable once again relative to average income, which is really important to mention because, as we looked over earlier, 15 years ago, or 10 years ago in 2015, average income was $53,000. Today it's only $55,000, but most rents and property prices have doubled in value. So we're looking here at the amount of units that would be needed to build above the status quo to bring that affordability back down. And basically, the reality is that there's no way we're ever going to get to a point where that is feasible in at least the next 5 to 10 years. It's literally impossible. And this is data from the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Association. So all this to say, when Canadians who are taxed into the ground and are already struggling to put food on the table and paying their $2,500 a month rent payment are comparing similar houses to each other in Canada versus, say, the United States for a third of the price, well, it makes many wonder what the point of all this is in trying to save towards that future in Canada. Just some food for thought. That being said, even if you wanted to leave Canada, it's not as simple as packing your bags and leaving. There are many taxation as well as residency issues that you need to be aware of. So of course, this can be its own video in and of itself. If you're interested in me making a video about all of these rules, regulations, and things to consider if you do truly want to leave, let me know down in the comments, because I've actually done a ton of research about this and I'm pretty well versed on it at this point. So yeah, let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in me going over 4 or 5 of the main ways you can actually go about leaving. If you think I forgot anything here, comment them down below so we can continue the conversation. If you want to learn more about stock market investing and getting some free money for opening accounts, you can check out the links down below in this video's description. Check out one of these 2 videos right here. I'm sure you'll love them as well. Thanks for watching. Subscribe.